and welcome back to Special Ed on Special Ed. I am your host, Dana Jonson, and thank you so much for joining me today. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Diane Gould, a pioneer in the movement to raise awareness about pathological demand avoidance, or PDA, which is a form of autism, or a subset of autism, I think. We'll get into that here in the United States. Diane is a licensed clinical social worker with over 40 years of experience working with neurodivergent children, adults, and their families. She is also the founder of PDA North America, which is an organization dedicated to supporting families and professionals navigating this unique autism profile. There we go, it's autism. Her groundbreaking book, Navigating PDA in America, co-authored with Ruth Fidler, is the first to adapt international knowledge of PDA to the unique challenges families face here in the U.S. Diane is passionate about equipping parents and professionals with the tools to create low-pressure, supportive environments for individuals with PDA. Whether she's working one-on-one with families, training school teams, or advocating for systemic change, Diane's goal is clear: to foster understanding, compassion, and strategies that work. Diane, thank you so much for joining me so we can shed some light on this topic. Much needed.
My pleasure.
Excellent. Well, before we get started, I do need to play my disclaimer because I'm a lawyer, so that's what I do. So here we go.
The information in this podcast is provided for general informational and entertainment purposes only and may not reflect the current law in your jurisdiction at the time you're listening. Nothing in this episode creates an attorney-client relationship, nor is it legal advice. Do not act or refrain from acting on the basis of any information included in or accessible through this episode without seeking appropriate legal or other professional advice on the particular facts and circumstances at issue from a lawyer or service provider licensed in your state, country, or other appropriate licensing jurisdiction.
So Diane, thank you so much for joining me. As I was reading that, I realized, yes, of course, PDA is a component of autism, which I know, and it is considered quote unquote new in the US. But how would you describe PDA? How would you define that for people listening?
Sure. First, I want to address the name. So
Sure.
PDA was developed as pathological demand avoidance. But in the last few years, PDA adults in the UK have renamed it pervasive drive for autonomy. Not only to take out the word pathological, which is problematic, but to make the point that it's really the drive for autonomy that matters, that demand avoidance is more a symptom of the drive for autonomy. But best way to know what a person wants it called is to ask them, like anything.
I've heard that the drive for autonomy is a more positive spin. You know, so many disabilities have names that are on the negative side and they sort of bring a negative image. And as we were talking before we started, you know, when you say demand avoidance, you can't avoid demands. In life, you have to engage in some demands. I want to get into more about that and what PDA is and how it plays out for individuals. But I'd like to start with you and what brought you here. How come you're the person I'm talking to about PDA in America?
I ask myself that question often. I think the real answer is if I see a need, I just need to address it. You know, a problem needs to be solved. And that's what I saw with PDA. I had focused my career on neurodivergence and individuals with autism. And there's always been things popping up in the field of autism. And I kind of got in a habit of not paying attention to them because so many were snake oil and unhelpful. And I'd heard about PDA and I didn't really pay attention until a client of mine. You know, I think everything that's happened in the world of disabilities throughout history has happened because some mother wouldn't take no for an answer. So this mother sent me article after article about PDA until I, said, all right, I'll find some time and read this. And when I read the articles, I was really blown away because I had been doing assessments on kids that had really horrendous trauma histories and they were having problems in school. And the kind of approach for PDAers was so similar to what I was recommending for these kids with trauma histories And it's not that trauma causes PDA, it's that trauma and autism impact the nervous system. And like I said, if I see a problem, I just want it fixed. And I thought, all right, I'm going to learn everything about PDA. I found someone to teach me about PDA who lived in the UK. And I thought, all right, I'll have a workshop in America on PDA and see if anyone comes. And I did. I held it in March 2020, right before the world shut down. But we had 165 people come, and we, got everyone back on airplanes before the airports closed. And it became clear to me that workshop was the beginning of something, not an end. I kind of only through March 2020. But the pandemic gave me some time to really think it through and talk to people and figure out how to get this movement started.
I love what you said about trauma. I think trauma is sort of emerging as something we're starting to understand more. And what you might think of as traumatic doesn't mean it has to be that severe for it to be trauma for a person to respond. As you said, because it responds, your nervous system responds to it. And so I can only imagine that combined with autism, how that could impact a person.
Well, autism is about having a different kind of nervous system. Donna Henderson is someone who talks about that a lot. She wrote a book, Is This Autism? That's great. And because autistic people have a different kind of nervous system, they process and experience the world differently than someone who doesn't have autism, who's not autistic. It makes sense that it's a nervous system difference. And for PDAers, they have a highly sensitive nervous system.
Yeah.
We have threat responses as part of our nervous system, generally fight, flight, and freeze. And that happens very quickly and easily to PDAers. And what PDAers and other people need to feel safe and not threat is connection with other people.
That makes sense. But it's hard to get that connection because a lot of times those social skills are either not present or emerging. And with all the sensory issues too, it's hard to interact the same way other people do in a certain situation. I wanted to ask, what are some of the key characteristics of PDA?
Sure.
You have autism, and then how do we identify and say we think it's this component?
Well, even backing up a little, what often happens and historically has happened is these individuals were not quickly diagnosed as autistic, or some of them not diagnosed as autistic, and parents and caregivers were told your child could not be autistic because he makes eye contact, or she's really socially motivated, or they're too imaginative. They cannot be autistic. And that is a huge barrier for these kids or adults. And part is too that the communication skills and social skills of PDAers is more advanced than many autistic people. So they're more likely to be able to mask their struggles in social interactions or just interactions in life. So in many ways, PDA is more a hidden disability because people aren't even recognizing.
They're not looking for it.
Right. Yes.
So how do you determine that? If you're, I guess that would be what we call high functioning, which I also hate the term high functioning. I think it means you don't bite people. But, when you have people who can mask that well, how does it typically come out? How is it usually identified? Is it the PDA characteristics or the autism characteristics that are identified first? Do you find?
Usually not the autism ones, but even though PDAers have different features than more stereotypical autistic people, they still struggle with communication or have different sensory needs, different emotional regulation experiences, all the things shared with autistic people. But PDAers specifically use social strategies to avoid demands. They need to make their own routines, to make their kind of own schedules. They can be very charming and social, but there's gaps of understanding. PDAers are very imaginative and creative, and they like role play. So PDAers might go into role play or a character to avoid tasks too, which makes them stand out. They can act very different in one setting than another. So in school, they might hold it together all day, or in certain social environments, but then fall apart at home.
I see that a lot with students who are holding it together with whatever the disability is.
Absolutely.
They're holding it together. They're masking to the best of their ability all day long. And they get home and that's their safe space to completely fall apart. And that's when I'm in IEP meetings saying, but the parents are seeing this and the school's saying, well, we don't see that anywhere. So, and we're starting now to get a better response. I think that schools are understanding that if that isn't addressed, it will come into the school day.
Well, that's good because not everywhere in the country there's getting understand. Often schools don't recognize that PDAers are having problems until they stop coming.
Yes. And school avoidance is huge right now.
Yeah. We call it needs-based non-attendance. We're trying to
based non-attendance. I like that.
Get away from school refusal, which, is putting the burden on kids, where a PDA's perspective would be, if this is not a safe place for me, if this is not a good place for me, I'm only being smart by not going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another characteristic shared by many PDAers is that they don't really recognize hierarchy. So they don't think a school principal or, deserves more respect than, they do as a second grader. Mm-hmm. They have this strong need for fairness and think things should be fair between people and respect should be earned.
And I think also what's important is when we talk about demand avoidance, or as you said, autonomy, which is a better descriptor, is it really does impact the person's nervous system to be told what to do, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it puts them in that fight or flight mode immediately, whereas a typical person might be annoyed by it or not even care and follow it blindly. It's not about, because I do hear this a lot. Well, they have to learn to hear no. Right. They have to learn to hear no. They have to follow certain rules. And that's all very true. But at the same time, if that demand for autonomy is there and it's so severe that they will go into fight or flight, you're not going to get a good reaction. And I think that's unfortunate because we are labeling children as behavior problems and difficult when in fact it's the issue of autonomy.
Right. And PDA kids generally really want to please. The PDA students I know who are unable to go to school really want to go to school. And one of the things that separates PDAers from other individuals is that they sometimes can't make themselves do things that they want to do. Mm-hmm. PDA might look forward to a birthday party for a month or a holiday and then get to the door and not being able to go. There's a very high anxiety. And that's where a lot of control comes from, is controlling environments and people in it lowers anxiety. So PDAers have an anxiety-based need for control. And they, can change their kind of moods frequently, which is why so many PDAers get misdiagnosed. They can be impulsive. They love learning. They love spontaneity, which is very different than other autistic people.
So how does it fit in with autism? Because there are so many differences. There are a lot of similarities, but there are also, from what I'm hearing from you, some of those key pieces that we think make autism. Some of those key pieces are missing or completely different. So how is it that we've placed it within autism?
Well, to back up a little, part of the reason why it's so hard is that our understanding of autism is very narrow and stereotypical. Mm. It only really speaks to kind of one presentation of autism. this very externalized presentation where people are very, they concrete and have their special interest really stand out as being different than the norm, where really the majority of autistic people just experience the world differently, but it's more internalized. Autistic people have this weird, rap that they're non-empathetic, which is really true. All my clients are empathetic, and PDAers are so empathetic. They absorb the emotions around them. But sometimes when people are so anxious and trying to be okay, they might appear callous. But there are struggles in social interaction. There are differences in communication. PDAers can be obsessive, but they're more likely to be obsessive about people than objects.
Things.
And things, yeah. So the similarities are there, all the sensory differences. So autism still fits. And more psychologists are willing to diagnose PDA or autism with a PDA profile. Even our methods of diagnoses aren't really sensitive to this more nuanced, subtle autistic presentation.
That's what I was going to ask, because in some regards, it's not just a checklist of things, but it kind of is. So
totally.
Exactly, and also for schools, because, a medical diagnosis of autism is different than the school diagnosis for vastly different, because they're for different reasons. So, where are we with identifying that? And I know that PDA is well known and accepted around the world. So why is it new to us? Why is that coming now? Like you said, you had to go to the UK to find somebody to enlighten you on it. Why is that a new thing?
It's a hard question to ask, but an important one. I feel that there's many reasons. And in America, I think we are behind in a lot of ways. And we still are very much in a medical model in terms of autism. I think it's hard for us to adopt change and new ideas very easily. Our systems are so behavioral. When I was writing my book, when I wrote this part about the American education system, and I, turned in what I had written to my co-author, Ruth, in the UK, she said, "You can't write that." I said, "I'm not making this up. How it is."
It's so true. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. She was, our systems are so behavioral. And this I think also this mentality of pull yourself up by your bootstraps is very American, and our push for independence is so American, where, I think other cultures more easily adopt the mentality of it takes a village and interdependence, which is really what people need.
Yeah.
So I think those things have been barriers.
I agree with you that for most students with disabilities, our schools are somewhat atrocious. And that's a problem for a variety of reasons, but it is a problem that we need to fix. I don't know if we will. As I was saying beforehand, I was hoping COVID would do it, but it didn't. So, it might be here to stay. What does it look like if you had a student in the classroom who was undiagnosed with PDA? What might that look like for a teacher?
So there's different presentations. It could be a child who is very quiet and shows no outward signs. You might notice or think maybe the student's anxious.
Because there's a lot of anxiety that goes along with this.
Absolutely. But they're missing a lot of days. Maybe homework gets done, maybe it doesn't. Parents at the conference might say there's so many, we like to call it more panic attacks, meltdowns, panic attacks at home. Just getting the child out the door is really hard. We have kids that are always late because it's a 2-hour fight to get them out the door. Or you might have kids who are just on their computers instead of the lesson, on their Chromebook. They might be investigating, science or space or something on their own, but not really interested in what the teacher's saying, not following those directions, or doing 2 math problems instead of 20, and kind of saying to the teacher, I got these 2 right. I know how to do them. Why would I do 18 more? It just doesn't make sense.
And I think, and part of that too is that demand for autonomy. They've only been given one choice. They've only been given one option as to what to do and how to do it.
Right. Oh, right.
We say that all the time. Tell me what to do or how to do it, but you can't tell me both. And but with PDAers, that's almost not possible physically for them, right?
Yeah, and energy level is an issue because everything takes a toll for a PDA or and other autistic people. Everything takes more energy and causes more stress. So we always have this joke, the juice has to be worth the squeeze. And so many demands aren't really worth it for a PDA who needs to really pick and choose how they're spending their energy. And, studying something just because you're told to do it, if you're not interested or don't see a value, a PDA might not be able to make themselves do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's part of it because we say a lot, suck it up. That's sort of our philosophy in our ways, right? As a country where suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get her done. And that goes back to that behavioral piece of how are we going to get this student to do what we want the way we want it, as opposed to looking at perhaps how we present the need.
Right. And so there's some specific things that do help support PDAers that I want to make sure we address. Yeah. But what you said reminded me of something else. Yeah, that, I think what happens with that mentality of suffer in silence, just suck it up, is the kids will try and they'll go to school until they can't. And often what happens is that they suffer autistic burnout then. So that child might not be able to leave their house or even bed because they're so burnt out from trying so hard to meet.
And that's that masking. That's why it's difficult to identify because they are functioning at a level that they can mask. Right. And I mean, I think an important distinction. Some people can't.
Well, even if they're not masking and they're protesting, but not being listened to. I mean, we always
be just as exhausting.
Right. Yeah. We always say, that kids with disabilities have to learn to advocate for themselves. But most kids had been advocating for themselves. Like, I don't want to do this, or leave me alone kind of stuff. And we just don't like what they're saying. And when they're trying and they're not listened to, that can lead to burnout.
Someone said to me that every behavior of a child is communication.
Yep.
Right. Everything is they're communicating a need that has not been met or something that they want. But every behavior is, if we looked at that quote unquote difficulty as communication, what are they communicating? As you say, they are advocating by saying, I don't want to do that. That might be advocating for themselves. They don't know how to phrase it any differently, but we have such a strong emphasis on compliance and expectations. And it's so critical. And that's that behavioral piece, right? So, I think that's where it gets confusing too, because with autism, we think my brain goes immediately to a BCBA. Let's get somebody in who knows how to do the behavioral piece. But in this situation, and I actually had a client where this was happening, that the staff were presenting the behavior plan. And I said to them, I'm not an expert, but just reading this, I think you're going to set them off.
Yep.
I think that's what's going to happen. And that's what happened.
Right. And often it's, unconscious communication from the nervous system, just that same threat, which is fight or flight or freeze shutdown. I think that's underneath kind of most of what we look at as challenging behaviors. And the function, in a functional analysis, one of the options isn't nervous system safety, but that's really what people need. And rewards and consequences do not work for this population. Even sometimes praise can add pressure. So any of our behavioral techniques make things worse, not better. Even if they work short term, they'll cause bigger long-term problems. And that is so hard for people to get their head around. So instead of a behavior intervention plan, I kind of propose a stress support plan. And there are so many accommodations that can be done in school. And, basically the approach that works is a relationship-based approach. PDAers need another nervous system to co-regulate. When they are in distress and not feeling safe, they need a calm nervous system to get them out of that threat response. So it's all about relationship. It's not about a teacher telling them what to do or threatening consequences or reminding expectations. It's this collaborative partnership in doing things together. So PDAers can do things with a partner. So it's not that they can't do anything, but there's so many accommodations that can work, but it all has to be within this framework of a trusting relationship.
So what are strategies that teachers or parents can use when communicating with a student? Say there's something they do need to do. And if you just walk up and say, you must do this and you must do it now, you're probably going to be met with some resistance, or it's adding to the level of anxiety and pressure that ultimately lead to the student not going to school. So what are some strategies that can be used in the classroom to help create that supportive environment?
When I first started working in PDA, a PDA adult said to me, I hate the word strategies. I wish no one would ever use it. And it probably took 4 years to figure out what he meant, because I always use the word strategies. We all do. But I figured out that what is needed is a mindset and a different approach, because strategies can be kind of doled out and taken back, doled out and taken back. And that doesn't work. So it's this different kind of mindset and approach that's very collaborative, relationship-based, attuned, flexible, because a student's window of tolerance and their capacity is going to be always changing. So just because they could handle a math quiz yesterday doesn't mean they can do it today. Or just because they could sit through an assembly last week doesn't mean they can do it this
And that's
morning.
a barrier I hit a lot, because I have teachers who say, I know they can do it because they did it last week.
All the time.
And I know I've seen them do it before, so I know they can. This is a choice. And it's not. It's the inconsistent output.
Right. And we're all inconsistent. So that's what always throws me. We're all inconsistent. This is just more inconsistent, but we, look closely at ourselves. I think we could do that. But there are kind of parts of the approach that are really helpful, including declarative language, just a less direct way of speaking. And Linda Murphy wrote a beautiful little book called The Declarative Language Handbook to make it easy for people. And it's just an adult commenting, sharing an observation. So it might be, I wonder about this. I'm thinking about this. I've noticed that. So you're not asking anything directly. Or sometimes even just talking out loud to yourself can help. Partnering makes a big difference. Doing things with, like, how about you talk and I'll type your thoughts? Like that partnership. I think that letting students opt out is really important. And you're like, you think you can handle this minute? No. Okay. What should we do instead?
Yeah. And waiting for them to be able to execute it. Going back to, they did it last week, but they can't do it right now. That doesn't mean they don't do it.
Right. Or you find a different way to show mastery. I'm kind of a big one on trying to remind people and remind myself, like, what the goal is, right? So if the goal is learning, which is sometimes seems forgotten in a school environment. So if the goal is learning, not compliance, then if the lesson is about ancient Rome and he is unable to write this paper and unable to take this test, can he just sit in the classroom after school and have a discussion about ancient Rome with you? Like showing competency in a different way. It's just about flexibility.
That was neat. When I got my master's in education, several classes, there were two professors who they did that. And they allowed us vastly different ways to submit assignments as well as for the final. And the whole purpose was to demonstrate to us how we were all different. And, not everybody chose the same method, because some people say, oh, well, I'd always choose the discussion. Everyone would choose that. They didn't. Some people chose the research paper. And there were like 3 or 4 different ways to do it. So, and I find myself saying that as well in IEP meetings when a teacher's telling me it's difficult or they can't adjust a certain activity or assignment. I say, well, what is it you're trying to ascertain? Are you trying to find out if they know the math strategies, or are you trying to literally just find out how many they can do in a minute?
Right.
Because they might not be able to do it in a minute, but the ones they do might all be correct.
Right. So, I hate timed things that.
Yeah.
Pressure is so hard for PDAers. It's just so counterproductive. And there's no value in doing things quickly. I mean, I've never in the workplace.
I've never had anybody ask me to do a bunch of math problems in under a minute ever.
Right.
Adult life.
No, it makes no sense. And so often I say to teachers, which I'm sure irritates them, but I know you think you have to do it this way, but you don't. It's just we're stuck in how we've always done it. And there's also this mindset too, that if you give kids autonomy, there will be like anarchy and that
they won't learn.
Right.
They will opt not to learn. And it's so funny you say, because I homeschooled a couple of my kids for a period of time, and everyone said, and not because I wanted to, I found myself in that situation. I'm not, but everyone said for every year that you've been in public school, take a month off, because it's a mindset shift. You have to shift your mindset. You have to shift how you believe you can learn and how you can demonstrate that learning. And it really was hard. I mean, I'm a former teacher too. So it was really hard for me to recognize learning in the vast different ways. And coincidentally, 2 of my children happened to be evaluated before they started the homeschooling and at the end. And their scores went up significantly on standardized tests, which I thought was interesting because I was worried it wouldn't, because they hadn't been in standard classrooms. And I think all of these things that you're talking about, the shift in mindset, there isn't a child who won't benefit from it.
Right. Absolutely.
Right.
There's so firm at being kind and attuned and flexible and really focusing on learning, not compliance.
Yeah.
No one gets hurt.
Yes. And compliance is compliance is a control issue.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's I need to control and I get why some teachers are stuck there, because the idea of being able to control a class of 25 kids without having quote unquote control is overwhelming.
Absolutely. And scary. But it's also like built on this feeling that like kids need it to do well. Like they need that iron hand to learn. Or be okay.
And it's interesting to me when I go to parent-teacher nights, some of my children's teachers who are the most strict about that control tend to have the most disorganized classrooms, because the kids are fighting against it so hard. Right. And I sit there and the poor teacher's saying, I'm doing my best, but it is a hard classroom to be in because, the boys do this, the girls do that. There's all this chaos. But they're explaining how it's absolutely mandatory that they have control over everyone. So like the tighter you squeeze, the more it doesn't work.
Right. Yes. So the more you try to convince someone otherwise, the more they push back. And we spend a lot of time trying to kind of convince kids that their reality is wrong.
Yes.
Instead, listen and validate.
That is true. That is like we're gaslighting them.
Yeah.
All the time.
And the best gift you can give a autistic or PDA kid or adult is self-understanding, for them to understand what they need to be okay, what makes them happy, what stresses them out, and what they need when they're stressed out. Just that self-understanding. And that's not really a part of education or even just teaching kids about the nervous system from an early age.
Well, and when they're out in the real world, whether that be college, work, whatever, understanding not only what they like, but what they don't like or what causes them the anxiety is so critical because you can avoid it.
Right. Right. Or you can ask for, accommodations or ask for help or assistance, but you need that self-understanding.
Absolutely. And that goes for self-advocacy. Self-understanding is where self-advocacy comes from, right? You have to know before you ask.
Right. You can't skip that step. And we, it's the problem with college is we expect kids to know what they need in a situation, an environment they've never been into. So how do they know? And that just sets so many kids I know up for failure to start with.
And all the freedom, because so many children are scheduled to death. They have every second of their day is scheduled. And then they go to college and nobody is standing there scheduling them. No one's sitting down and telling them they have to do X, Y, and Z. And the scaffolding is gone. So if they don't understand how they learn, what supports they need to seek out, if they don't understand those components, they're not going to be able to be successful in any environment. And, we talk about the emotional well-being as well. Many, many, many disabilities coexist with anxiety. This is no exception. I mean, part of the PDA is the anxiety, the inability to move past the anxiety. And we don't do enough, I think personally, just in my world, that we don't do enough to promote emotional well-being. And I see sometimes parents are doing it for the one child they've been told is diagnosed and doing it, but nobody else in the house is. You're still sending a message, right?
Yes. Yeah. Right. And parents, also taking care of their own mental health and stress.
Well, that's part of it too, is demonstrating I'm taking care of myself too. Right. And I'm not saying that's always successful or that it's bad, but, we don't as a society promote that as well. I know at 3 of my kids' colleges, they provide counseling. They have a whole department just for promoting emotional well-being, but you still have to go, right? You have to get there.
Right. Yes. It's a step. It is a step.
Absolutely. So if someone wants to learn more about PDA and understand it better or learn how to adjust their mindset, what are the resources that you recommend? I strongly recommend your book, and I do it all the time, Navigating PDA in America by Diane Gould. And I think it's wonderful. And I think it's wonderful in how you describe a lot of how, I know it's co-authored with Ruth Fiedler, how you both describe making that mind shift and giving those examples on how to do that and what it would look like, because I think that's very helpful. What other resources do you recommend?
At PDA North America, we have so many resources. We do at least an event every week, 3 webinars. So many webinars. The first Thursday night of every month is a free webinar, PDA 101. We have downloadable resources. We have blogs. We have a list of providers that have identified themselves as PDA affirming.
I was going to say, I went to a couple of the webinars that were conducted by someone who has PDA, and that was very helpful to hear how they explained it.
Yes.
It really made sense, because I hear people say, well, no one wants to hear no. That's not what this is about at all. So you can't really make that mind shift if you don't fully understand how it's impacting the person. And I found that really helpful. So that's PDA North America, which is a great organization. They do have tons of resources.
We're nonprofit. I think our mailing list went from 700 to 7,000 in 1 year.
Wow.
I know it's growing and growing and growing. So it's www.pdanorthamerica.org.
Great. And I know I go to a conference every year for the Council of Parents, Attorneys, and Advocates, COPA. And this year I noticed somebody's presenting on PDA.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yep. So
That's a good thing. I've heard that's a rough one to present at, so I have never tried.
I present every year. I love COPA. It's a great resource for parents, but I'm happy that somebody is presenting on it because that's the first sign to me that word is getting out.
Yeah. I think word is getting out, and hopefully our school-based training program will be a success, that, schools will be able to use the information and then actually make changes, not just take it in and go back to doing what they were doing before, which happens a lot. But,
Wonderful.
But we have all kinds of resources for professionals and parents. We have a level 1 and level 2 training program.
Oh, that's great.
We have all kinds of stuff, and an annual conference in March.
Amazing. And I will have all that information and those resources in my show notes. So if you're on the go right now, you can go back and look at the show notes and they'll be there. If somebody is listening to this or reading this and feels like they must connect with you directly, they have to get you in to train their school or their parents or whoever it may be, how would they reach out to you? Would it be through PDA North America, or is there a better way to get to you?
Or DianeGouldTherapy.com.
Okay.
Either way.
DianeGouldTherapy.com, which I will also have in my show notes. So I can't thank you enough, Diane. This has been very helpful. I'm hopeful that we get the word out and people start to better understand PDA and how to educate children who have it.
So I hope so. Thank you so much for helping spread awareness.
Excellent. I'm always here. But thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Please don't forget to follow this podcast so you don't miss any new episodes, and leave a review when you have a chance. If there's anything you want to hear about or comment on, please go to my Facebook page, Special Ed on Special Ed, and find me there. I'll see you next time here on Special Ed on Special Ed. Have a fabulous day. The views expressed in this episode are those of the speakers at the time of the recording and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company, or even that individual today.